The man suddenly fell to the ground and kept vomiting yellow liquid. The radiation meter beside him also rose instantly. The passerby was so scared that he backed away. He looked up to the sky in horror, but found a huge radiation line coming from the sky. The highway was in chaos. Everyone was running as fast as they could. At the same time, the whole city was in chaos. People rushed to the station to stay alive. All traffic was paralyzed. The supermarkets are in a state of chaos. Restless people are looting for supplies. Rescue troops have left their residents behind and fled. The cause of this disaster is both natural and man-made. In the south of South Korea, there's a small coastal town that specializes in nuclear energy. This has provided many jobs for the locals, though they all work at the bottom of the ladder with hard labor. But many families have been lifted out of poverty. One of them is Huron's family. His father and brother worked at a nuclear power plant. They were killed in an accident. To support the family, Huron took over his father's job, but he hated working at the nuclear power plant. He wanted to be a fisherman someday. This dream, which was so wild and unstable, naturally, his family was strongly opposed to it. Now he's forced to suffer in a nuclear power plant. This nuclear power plant is said to be able to withstand an earthquake of magnitude 7, has been running smoothly for 40 years. According to the regulations, all equipment should be inspected regularly, but in order to save time and cost, usually only the cooling work is maintained. The experienced plant manager, Kun, sensed a huge safety hazard. After all, many of the equipment had never been replaced in 40 years, so he proposed a major overhaul of all the equipment. But the leaders were unwilling to bear the pressure and losses from all sides. They kept finding reasons to reject his request for an overhaul, so he had no choice but to report to the president. But the president had just taken office and had no real power, and the prime minister is backed by plutocrats. They only care about money, not human lives. Not to mention the fact that the nuclear power plant has been operating safely and smoothly. A major overhaul would be a waste of money. Jenkins' proposal was not taken seriously, but he was removed from his post. But that night, something unexpected happened. A 6.0 magnitude earthquake struck the town. There were no casualties, but the tremor caused a crack in the valve of the nuclear power plant's atomic furnace. The reactor's cooling water began to leak downward. The consequences would have been disastrous if it hadn't been dealt with. But the new plant manager was an incompetent, connected man. He was the first to report the situation. He wouldn't take action until the headquarters gave him an answer. Jenkins was furious when he saw this. There are over 30 valves in the entire plant. The pipelines are thousands of kilometers long. Waiting for a reply from headquarters is like waiting for death. He argued with the new plant manager. He was laughed at for worrying too much. Unfortunately, Jenkins has been removed from his post and has no real power. All he can do is watch as the fool takes charge. At the same time, the headquarters received the news. His subordinates immediately suggested issuing a white alert to remind residents of the neighborhood to prepare for evacuation. But the leader refused with a look of displeasure. This is a critical time for the company's development. If the residents know about it, it will cause panic. He didn't want to see the company's interests suffer. He told his subordinates to fix the cracks. The new plant manager received the order. He found a few workers who didn't know anything about technology, but only knew how to weld. They were afraid of being infected by the radiation if they stayed too long. They picked up their tools, welded the cracks, and left in a hurry. The temperature of the reactor suddenly went crazy. The coolant level plummeted. The leaders finally realized something was wrong. Fearing that the situation was out of control, they called for another group of people to go down and check it out. I didn't realize it was a group of maintenance personnel who didn't know the principles. They closed and locked the valves. This operation directly led to a huge increase in pressure inside the pipeline. A large amount of liquid sprayed out. The maintenance crew was hit and fell to the ground. The numbers on the radiation detector they had with them rose instantly. The injured crew members were quickly carried out. By this time, the furnace was already melting down. There's a high probability of a horrific nuclear explosion. Radiation will be released. A 100-mile radius of the city will be devastated. The president has received the news and is preparing to hold a press conference. He told the people to get ready to evacuate at any time. But at the moment, the prime minister and the nuclear power plant executives are still hiding it, explaining that it's still a small problem that can be solved. A press conference would cause panic. Meanwhile, the temperature of the atomic furnace is still soaring. The staff can only keep pouring coolant into the furnace, but compared to the rising temperatures, their efforts are just a drop in the bucket. An expert from the government has arrived in a hurry, advised the plant manager to open the valves to relieve the pressure, to release some of the radiation, although it would cause great harm to the villagers nearby. But in order to avoid more serious consequences, this is was the only way to avoid more serious consequences. After the new plant manager reported the situation and the solution, it was only then that the president realized how critical the situation at the plant was. It's too late to evacuate the entire village. He had to evacuate the 20,000 people in the vicinity of the plant. When the maintenance staff below realized that the reactor was about to explode, they left their work and started to run for their lives. I didn't realize that the leaders had ordered the escape door to be closed, forcing them to return to work. The evacuation is not going well. Too many people were leaving at once. The bus was stuck on a country road. At this point, Jenkin couldn't wait any longer. If the nuclear reactor exploded, the consequences would be unimaginable. He decided to sacrifice the bodies of 20,000 people for the survival of many more. He recklessly ordered the exhaust valve to be opened. After the staff's operation, the exhaust valve didn't respond. The remote control is not working, so we have to open it manually. What's even more surprising is that there are so many people at the scene. No one knows where the exhaust valve is. They could only take out the map to study the exact location on the spot. Finally found maintenance personnel ready to open. The pipe had already ruptured due to excessive pressure. Nuclear reactor instantly exploded. The scene of the explosion was a mess. The deaths were horrific. The cries of despair echoed throughout the plant. The prime minister was only looking out for his own interests. He lied to the people within 20 kilometers that it was just an emergency evacuation drill. He told them to stay in their homes and not to go out. At the same time, the residents within 10 kilometers were strictly controlled. He's leaving them to fend for themselves. The president challenged the program. The prime minister cited the country's economy as the reason. The president is not happy with the situation, but he had no power, so he held his tongue. Then the president met to study the remedies. The experts analyzed the situation. The only remedy was to pour cold water into the reactor to cool it down. After the order was given, the residents of the town were placed in a gymnasium. In fact, to keep them under control, they were unaware that the plant had exploded. But Heron's girlfriend sensed something was wrong, so she snuck out. Firefighters soon arrived on the scene, but the radiation levels are too high for them to go in. Jenkin risked his life to save Heron and the others, but they only dared to greet him from afar. When Gon turned around and looked at the nuclear power plant, it looked like the end of the world. He rushed in again without hesitation. Inside were not only his colleagues, but also the lives of his colleagues. Huron's girlfriend was devastated by the scene. She desperately asked her boyfriend to go back with her. When Huron turned his head to look at the injured workers, he ignored his girlfriend's heartbreaking cries. He returns to the nuclear power plant, which he hates. Under the influence of Jenkin and Heron, the fire chief finally got the hang of it. Instead of waiting to be infected by the radiation and die, I'd rather take advantage of the situation. But the new plant manager escaped unharmed. On the other hand, Huron's girlfriend returned to the gym in a panic. She told everyone about the situation at the nuclear power plant. The radiation has been released. Everyone fled in fear. But what they didn't realize was that the exits were locked and guarded by soldiers, and the internet was cut off. Obviously, the government doesn't want the news to get out. On the other side, Heron, who's been fighting for a long time, has finally given up. He's spitting blood and his life is in danger. Firefighters have set up a ladder and are spraying water into the reactor. They're trying to cool down the reactor to prevent a secondary explosion, but the temperature is not dropping. The fuel rods are still melting. Radiation levels are rising. The firefighters are overwhelmed by the radiation levels and are collapsing. The entire rescue effort is extremely difficult and tragic. At that moment, Jenkin realized that the fire trucks were withdrawing. He asked the captain about the situation. It turns out the trucks are going to a freshwater reservoir 20 kilometers away to replenish water. It's a waste of time to go back and forth. The reactor could explode before they get the water back. Besides, there's seawater right next to it. Why do we have to go so far away? We found out after questioning. The senior management believes that seawater is corrosive. It might cause the reactor to be destroyed in the eyes of these executives. Human life is nothing more than grass. It wasn't long before the rescuers were suffering from vomiting and unconsciousness. They were taken to a temporary hospital, but the radiation levels were too high. The hospital didn't have any effective medicine. They could only keep spraying water on their bodies to cool them down. This shows how much damage nuclear radiation can do to your body. Soon the news of the radiation leak was reported by the media. Many countries began to order their residents to return to their countries. When the news broke, the whole country exploded. Residents fled the country in fear of the radiation. Millions of people fled at once. Social order collapsed and chaos ensued. Train stations, airports, and highways. Wherever there was a road, it was surrounded. Supermarkets, hospitals, and other places where supplies were stored were looted. Residents of the trapped gymnasium realized that the rescue team outside the door was secretly withdrawing. They realized that something big must have happened outside, so they broke down the doors and escaped. By now, transportation was impossible. Hee-eun's girlfriend had to flee on foot with her family, as far away as possible before the radiation reaches them. The country is spiraling out of control, and the president is frustrated. He hated the fact that he had no power and could do nothing. It was his wife's words that snapped him out of it. If he waited any longer, more and more people would die. Then the president regained his composure. He led his entourage to the command center. He removed the prime minister from command and put himself in charge. He ordered the use of seawater to cool the air. The fire department was quick to carry out the order. As the seawater continues to pour in, the temperature of the reactor has finally stabilized. Radiation levels are dropping rapidly. I thought the crisis was over. I didn't realize there was more trouble ahead. There was a leak at the bottom of the cooling water storage pool. A large amount of coolant leaks out through the cracks. If not dealt with in time, it will explode just like the reactor. The power is comparable to atomic bombs. The radiation generated is unpredictable. The only way to remedy the situation is to plug the cracks and waterproof them. But the problem is that the leaking cooling water is up to our knees. With such a high concentration of radiation, even if you're heavily armed, you won't last long. And it's gonna take a lot of manpower. It's a suicide mission. There's no time to lose in remedying the situation. The president has no choice but to apologize on TV. He hoped that some brave man would die for his country to finish the job. When Hee-eun saw the news, he smashed the TV in anger. He cursed this selfish and incompetent government. But suddenly he realized now his family is living on the streets. The radiation is still spreading out. Wherever they go, they're affected. And he's already been exposed to the radiation and he's dying. Instead of lying in a hospital bed and dying in pain, I'd rather be a hero and fight for my family's survival. Hee-eun's words inspired the workers in the hospital.
며칠 더 살아 못 살아봐 그 차이 아이가.
While people were fleeing in panic, a black bus was traveling against the traffic to the scene of the accident. They were all prepared to die for their families. As the bus passed by the town where they lived, they thought of the good old days, but now they were about to leave this world. Soon the group arrived at the scene of the accident. Firefighters on both sides bowed their heads in honor of these unsung heroes. After entering the nuclear power plant, Zenkun divided them into groups. He alternated between them to repair the cracks inside. A worker can stand in the coolant for 5 to 10 minutes. One crew member would fall down, another would follow, and they would rotate. The repair work is broadcast live across the country. Everyone was looking forward to the moment when the crisis would be solved, and their families were devastated. But halfway through the job, something happened. The cracks at the bottom of the reservoir began to widen. No amount of manpower could fill it. It seems that everything has come to an end. Jenkins was reluctant but had to face reality. Just as everyone was packing up and ready to leave, Heron suddenly stopped them and said he had an idea. Since we can't fill the cracks, why don't we block the entrance and exit of the room below to create a new reservoir, even if the cracks can't take it? The nuclear waste will fall into the new reservoir. It won't cause much damage. Everyone realized what Heron was saying in a flash, but they can't wait until they've planted the bombs to seal off the entrance. They can only do both at the same time. In that case, one person would have to be left inside to plant the bomb, and that person would mean never getting out. Heron was the only one who knew anything about bombs. He stepped up to the plate to save his family behind him. He had to give himself up in order to save his family. Maybe everyone here will die someday, just a little sooner than they did. The workers tearfully welded the iron door to the basement. It's not just a steel door. It was also the grave of their brother, with tears in his eyes. Heron put the bomb in place, but he couldn't hold on any longer. The trauma of the radiation was too much for his body to handle. Looking at the pictures of his family on his cell phone, how helpless he looked at that moment. He is also his parents' child. At this moment, he has to face the countdown of his life. Of course, these ordinary people will be afraid. It's human nature and it's an indelible fear, but we call them heroes. It's because they made a choice. They still made a choice against human nature. That's the greatest light that shines in human nature. We can die with a smile on our faces, or we can cry and die. Either way, they deserve to be remembered by the people and glorified by history. He held onto his last ounce of strength. He used the camera on his helmet to say goodbye to his family. Perhaps this is his last concern in this world. He apologized to his mother for his 20 years of ignorance. He thanked his sister-in-law for taking care of his mother. He also regretted that he couldn't fulfill his promise to his girlfriend. It was only then that Heron realized how precious the seemingly ordinary everyday life was. He cried so loudly that he didn't know what to do. He didn't know why he had come to this point. After the workers were safely evacuated, he pressed the trigger with determination. and all the pain and suffering was gone. Huron's family wept at his departure. Friends remembered the man they'd grown up with. Only the executives were left with a feigned sadness. They only remember the loss of a nuclear power plant, but they don't remember the name of the man who saved so many lives. Since then, the area around the plant has been declared a no man's land. The inhabitants have moved to other places to continue their lives. The workers with Heron died of radiation exposure. The president held a memorial service for them, but no matter how solemn, no matter how grand the ceremony, the lives lost can never come back. Close Pandora's box to give future generations a world of food and clothing.